going to take a look at the 1920s economy. Was it really a true boom, meaning a big growth and then a crash? Or was the whole thing based on this false sense of prosperity, that it wasn't real? Okay, so I had asked you to ignore this line when you did this handout because I wanted to explain it. And so this line shows the growth of the economy and then the shrinking of the economy and the growth and then this deep depression here. So I put in what we were talking about. So at the beginning, we see the United States experiencing major growth during and after World War I. And then right after the war ended, there was a post-war recession, like a little dip in the economy. And that's different from the Great Depression. So you're supposed to be aware of that there are two different dips in the economy. So the first one is due to the end of World War I, and then we see an economic growth in the 1920s, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then at the end of the 1920s, with the stock market crash and the bank failures, we see the Great Depression hitting. And so this is a deeper economic depression than the earlier recession. Then we'll see the New Deal recovery, and we'll talk about that later on in this unit. And then the economy really taking off after World War II starts. All right, so let's go on to our journal entries from this character named Robert. And his first journal entry is in March of 1919, so that's during the post-war recession. He's depressed. And so he describes the state of the American economy, pointing to the fact that there are these excess war goods on the shelves, nobody's buying, so the economy's slowing down. There's high unemployment, and he points to this 11% of unemployed people. And during the height of the Great Depression, we'll say that there were about 25% unemployment. In some places, it was as bad as 60%. But when the economy is doing well, economists expect it to be about 5% unemployment. So 11% is pretty high. Falling prices for food during the 1920s, and the farmers lost their farms to the banks when they couldn't make their bank payments, so that's called a foreclosure. And weak unions prevented workers from earning more money, because if they went out on strike, the owners of their factories would go to court and get an injunction to end the strike. And we had talked about that earlier in the year. And it shows again that the court system was backing big business. And in general, there was a hostility to unions in the 1920s. They were seen as foreign or communist, and so people did not really support union activity, and that was bad news for the workers. And in turn, it's bad news for the economy, because if workers don't earn money, they can't buy things, and that hurts everybody. Okay, so going fast forward in time, we're now in 1925, and Robert writes a second journal entry, and things are different in his life. And he kind of has this YOLO attitude, where he wants to just live for the here and now. So he's willing to buy a new house he can't really afford. He buys expensive items like furniture on layaway, so he's in debt to the store. So he just puts a little bit of money down, he walks off with the couch, and he'll pay it over time. And he goes out to these illegal speakeasies to party, even though he could be arrested, because remember, the prohibition is in effect at this point. And going to a speakeasy is illegal, or was illegal, I should say. And this next question, can you point to any other group in this entry that might also have made foolish decisions? Well, the banks and stores could have set higher standards before loaning people money, so American consumers might not be so overextended or in debt. So while individuals were making stupid decisions, banks and stores were also making stupid decisions. And in this cartoon, we see this organized crime gangster riding up these steps, and he's shooting at the police. And we see different types of corruption growing and getting higher here. So we see organized crime is shooting at the police as it climbs the stairs of corruption. So we see the idea that many people were willing to break the law, and this led to the growth of corruption and a lack of respect for the law. And what led to the growth of organized crime? Well, not many ordinary people are willing to take the risk to import alcohol illegally or produce illegal alcohol. And so organized crime stepped in to do this, and there was a lot of money to be made, so they became very, very powerful. This next section talks about some of the government officials who were committing acts of fraud and graft while they were holding political positions, and it demonstrates that the government officials were interested in using their offices for personal profit, not to serve the public. And so that's just a little problem with the government, that we see these different scandals going on in the 1920s. And then I had asked you to take a look at some of these statistics from the economy of the 1920s, and I want to talk about what it means to be housing starts with new construction. So when you buy a house, you hire a real estate broker, you hire a lawyer to buy the house, you are building a house from scratch, you hire an architect, you buy wood, you buy glass, you hire construction workers, you buy appliances, you pay a landscaper, you hire all these people to build this house, and then the house gets sold. So one house, the building of one house, employs many, 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 many people. Okay, so that's what housing starts means. And so if a house is built, months later the economy grows. And so in this case, new construction started to fall from 1925 to 1929. So all those houses are not being built and all those jobs are not being created. So we can make an assumption from this part that there was some weakness in the economy as early as 1925. Some of this other information here should be alarming, that 50% of Americans earn less than $1,500 a year. And what that meant is that you couldn't afford most items that manufacturers were producing. So there was something called low demand in the economy, where people couldn't buy things. They could buy one new outfit a year, and they were not living this fancy life like in Great Gatsby. Half of the homes in the cities had electric lights or a furnace, only half. 1 in 10 homes had electric refrigerators. And then overall, if we look at the economy, 1% of the population had their income increase by 75%. That's a lot. And the income of the entire population as a whole had their income increased by 9%. So a 9% growth in income is still overall good, but the reality is that half of Americans were not enjoying that growth because they're still living with less than $1,500 a year. So to make some conclusions about our economy, we said the economy was starting to slow down as early as 1925. 50% of Americans had very little money to spend. The top 1% of Americans did very well. 49% of Americans did moderately well. And 50% were living at the poverty level. So it's certainly not an even distribution of growth. And going on to our last journal entry here in September of 1929, and we know the stock market crash is coming in October of 1929. So Robert's excited. He's buying stock on margin, which means that he's only putting a certain amount of the purchase price down and taking out a loan for the rest of it. And he's convinced he's going to get rich in the stock market. I'll explain this picture in a minute. So Robert's taking a serious risk because he's basically, he's taking a serious risk, I should say. He's taking out a loan to gamble in the stock market. So let's say, for example, he buys stock worth $100. He puts down 10. He takes out a loan for 90. But when the stock crashes, and it did, he loses his $10, and he now is automatically in debt to the bank for $90, to the stockbroker. So he goes to the bank to take out his savings, but because many other people did the same, including the bank was investing in the stock market, the bank ran out of money to give to people. So Robert is now in debt, has no money to pay, And even people who didn't invest in the stock market lost their savings. So Robert was being stupid and he made some really bad economic decisions. And then people who were conservative and just kept their money in the stock market also lost their savings. So everybody lost here. So I want to just point out what this picture is for. This is supposed to be Robert, so we can imagine him with a haircut. And he's on a bull, so he's riding a bull market. And that's an expression that you should be familiar with, a bull market. That means that the stock market is going up. The opposite of that is a bear market. And that means the stock market is contracting. So these are just terms that people in the news use that you should be familiar with, just so you can understand what's going on in the news. And then at the end of our discussion, let's go back to our AIM question. If we're looking at the 1920s economy, was it a true boom or was it false prosperity? That's really an opinion question. And to answer that, we could look at some of these statistics that we examined today. Most people would look at this information and they might say it really was kind of a false prosperity because not everybody was experiencing the growth. There are people who support the idea of the pro-business government economic plans in the 1920s, and they might say overall the income of everybody increased by 9% as a whole for the country, so it does show economic growth. But that's really an opinion question, so you can form your own judgment on that. Have a great day, everybody. Miss you.